Alrighty, people, we're live on a Monday for what's going to be a big week for streams, and it's an interesting. I'll let people trickle in slowly because YouTube has been so good on notifications. I am being told people were getting notifications for last week's stream with Scott Rouse yesterday. So late notifications for a live stream do nobody any good. Is my mic good? By the F's in the crowd, the mic seems to be good. Late. Yes, I was actually 1 second late again because I had to get the camera into focus. Okay, this is going to be an amazing thing. The world of technology and Twitter, let me just get this off. For as awful and dirty and sassy and snarky as it is beautiful in a way where you can see something. You can see something of someone else's life from literally across the country in a different, well, I guess in a different country and across the continent. And you can actually reach out and make a connection with somebody who you've never met before, who's never heard of you. But until you saw their tweet, you had never heard of them, but you see something, you reach out and you make a connection. And that is how we're going to be doing a live stream with Joe Kent tonight. For anybody who is not on the filthy cesspool that is Twitter, occasionally it produces some gems, some wonderful information that, that you didn't know existed. And then when you discover it, it gives you a little bit of hope. It gives you a little bit of optimism for the future. And it also inspires you somewhat. So I saw this tweet, 2.5 minute, well, it's 2 minute and 20-second promotional video coming from some dude named Joe Kent, who looks a lot like, I think it's Caviezel from The Thin Red Line. If anybody hasn't seen that movie, 1998, I think, or 96, a very long, interesting cadence war movie. Joe Kent, I see the image. I see that he looks just like the guy from Thin Red Line. I watch it. It's a 2 minute and 20-second video. And immediately, no special effects, no nothing, captivated by the story, captivated by the individual. And if you haven't seen it, I don't know, you can probably find it on YouTube, Twitter, wherever. It's Joe Kent explaining why he's running for his congressional district in Washington State. And it was a powerful, touching 2 minute and 20-second expose of an individual's life history and why they feel compelled to run for office. And confession through projection, maybe I could see, maybe I could relate a little bit more than I would have ever wanted to his message, which is when you see the world around you seemingly crumbling and seemingly burning to the ground, you'll have any one of a number of reactions. One is to run and hide. 2 is to close your eyes. 3 is to join the side that you think is winning in this and, hope to live another day of peace. Was I doing ABC or 1, 2, 3, 4? And whatever. 4 is to get out there and try to make a difference. And that seems to be what Joe hopes to do by, I don't know the names of all the people that are running in the state, but he wants to unseat or run against a Republican who voted for the impeachment of Trump. We'll get the details out of this as we go through it. But more important in my mind and in my spirit than the details is the individual. And when you get a glimpse of someone who you think it looks like a genuinely good person with a genuinely compelling and inspiring story and heartbreaking story, you want to talk to that person and you want to get to hear their story. So that is the raison d'être, to speak a little French, of tonight's stream. To see who Joe Kent is, I've got my questions. I want to go through the early life, and the future of what Joe Kent wants to bring to America. Robert will be in here sooner than later, and we're going to see where this goes. So now, without further ado, standard caveats. I put it on slow mode, 15 seconds, just so I can keep control of the chat. Take care of any spammers if we see any. No legal advice. Please keep the discourse civil in as much as possible. I appreciate it's the internet. And without further ado, let me see if I didn't forget anything. I don't think I forgot anything. Let's bring in Joe. Let's get the discussion started. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for, obviously, thank you for responding to a blind outreach via the interwebs. Sometimes they can be suspicious, sometimes they can be nefarious, but thank you for answering and agreeing to this. This is great.
Absolutely.
Joe, so I mean, I like to start from the very beginning with everybody, even if it bores some people. Starting from the beginning, I know a bit of your history, and I've been catching up on your social media for a couple of days now. I know that you're the oldest of 5 kids.
That's right. Yep.
But let's hear about that. Let's hear youth, what your parents did, where you're from, and what it's like being the oldest of 5 kids.
Yes, I grew up in Oregon, mostly right here in the Pacific Northwest. I was born in a little tiny logging town called Sweet Home, Oregon, while my folks were in the Forest Service and getting ready to put themselves through college and eventually law school. So lived a little bit when I was really young in Eugene, Oregon, while my folks were going through school, and then spent most of my childhood in Portland. So they moved up to Portland after they graduated. I'm the oldest of 2 little brothers and 2 little sisters. There's a pretty big age gap there, though, because my folks were very much in the working world right after they got out of school. So there's an 8-year age gap between me and my oldest little brother. And then it goes 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, and 14 years. So my parents have multiple generations of kids, essentially.
Same parents, like all children from the same parents?
Yep, same parents, same mom and dad.
14-year difference. That's pretty big. Now, before I bring Robert in, I see he came. Did you actually say that your hometown is called Sweet Home?
It's called Sweet Home, Oregon, yeah.
Okay, that's the second most interesting city name. There's a place called Saint-Rémy de Haha in Quebec. Saint-Rémy de Haha. And it literally is haha. And apparently it was the sound the bay made when the water clapped up against the shore or something. Let's bring Robert in. Let's arrange this not like that. Not like that at all. Not like this. And now we're good. Okay. Robert, how you doing?
Good.
Okay, you might want to bring up your volume a little bit if you can.
Now?
That's better. Okay, so Joe, oldest of 5 kids, 14-year difference. So that makes you, I mean, I guess in some way effectively a father to your youngest sibling, if not your youngest 2 siblings.
Yeah, like uncle, father-ish, more than typical big brother. Yeah, for sure.
And okay, so and your parents, what did they do? It'll be relevant actually when we get to what you ended up choosing to do in life. Were they in the military, or were they not at all in the military?
Actually, it's kind of funny. It's not really. It's kind of relevant now, but not really at the time. My parents are both lawyers, so they went to law school, University of Oregon, and then they both went into legal practice. My mom eventually left the workforce and became a full-time stay-at-home mother. But my dad continued to practice law up until a few years ago, and now he does mediation.
What kind of law do they practice?
So civil law. My dad did all civil torts, and then my mom did bankruptcy law for a while.
Now, not to project my own childhood, I'm the youngest of 5, and my dad was a lawyer. My mom was a teacher, gave it up to raise the kids. But
okay.
Were you spending a lot of time? Were your parents around growing up, or were you sort of quite independent?
They were definitely around a lot. I mean, so when my folks were in law school, they kind of like had a split schedule where my mom did nights and my dad did days. So there's always kind of one of them with me, which as I got older and had to tackle just regular college myself, I was very impressed with that they could do that at such a young age and, keeping up with me as a little kid. So they were definitely always around. I had a, just a great childhood in the Pacific Northwest. So yeah, they were definitely very present.
Okay. Now this is the biggest question. How does the first son of 2 lawyers get into what you did in the military?
That's a good question. Yeah. So I don't have any military in my family. Both grandfathers fought in World War II, like that generation did. Other than that, I had an uncle who was in the Marines for a little bit, but other than that, there's no military. There's not a lot of military in Portland, Oregon. I don't know if it was just too much G.I. Joe and A-Team growing up, but from the earliest time when people were like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I was like an Army man or a commando or something like that. And that eventually became more of a concrete plan as I got a little bit older and read books. But, it's always what I felt called to go do,
Now, what was your family? I mean, how long had your family been in Oregon? Where did they come from ancestrally before then?
So originally they're from Virginia. So when my dad was working in the Forest Service, they had a job opening out in Oregon, and that's how we ended up on the West Coast. So my dad's from Ashland, Virginia, just to the north of Richmond, and then my mom's from Alexandria, Virginia.
And does that go back several generations?
It does, yeah. So my mom's side were, I think, like 3rd or 4th potato famine Irish. Originally settled up in Pennsylvania, made their way down to Virginia. But on my dad's side, they're back to not necessarily the Mayflower, but right around that era, deep rooted. The Kent side is pretty deep rooted on the West Coast between Maryland and Virginia.
Okay, so your parents are lawyers. You decide at like what age that you're actually going to go into the military, and then what do? Do you go from a Canadian who's never served, and I've never done any of this? Do you go straight out of high school into the military? Do you go to university? How does it work, and what do your parents say about it when you tell them that you're doing this?
By the time I actually went and did it, I went right after high school. My parents weren't too surprised, but I think they figured at some point I'd kind of grow out of it just because it wasn't a common career path in Portland, Oregon. But if you're growing up in Portland, Oregon, and you want to rebel against the system, you go and you enlist in the Army. That's how you rebel, because everybody else is like, you got to go to college and get a liberal arts degree because it's Portland. You got to do something in the creative art, white collar space. And so I just like I said, from the time I was really young, it started out as a little boy G.I. Joe fantasy, but then as I got older, I started reading more serious books. I started bothering Army recruiters when I was like 15 years old, saying, "Hey, can I just join? Do I really need to finish high school?" And they were like, "Yeah, you actually have to finish high school, man." But then when I was 13, the Black Hawk Down incident happened. So our soldiers, Ranger Regiment guys, and Delta Force guys got into a pretty massive firefight in Mogadishu, and it was one of the first, I'd say, well-covered combat incidents that we'd had that the American people were really exposed to. Tragically, a lot of the bodies of the fallen were dragged to the streets of Mogadishu. It was a really big deal, and that hit me. I was 13 years old. I knew I wanted to go in the Army, and I was like, "Hey, who are those guys? Like, what? How come those guys are over there fighting it out in savage combat, and we're back here in the States living peacefully?" And so I kind of got that in my mind. I wanted to go be one of those guys. I talked to the Army recruiters. They said, "Hey, those guys are Army Rangers, and you can enlist as an infantryman and take a shot at going to the Ranger Regiment pretty much right out of high school." So enlisted when I was 18 and pretty much never looked back.
What was Portland like growing up? I mean, especially obviously compared to today, but I remember like there was the hipster revolution and all of that. What was it like growing up? When did that occur? How is it different than it is today? So forth.
Yeah, it all happened when I was gone. So when I was in the 80s and 90s, when I was growing up, Portland was pretty ideal because it was a growing city. So you could go get the downtown city experience, riding the bus, riding the metro. But it's a very manageable small city. It still kind of is in comparison to a lot of bigger cities. And then we had some suburbs that were nice, and then you could drive pretty much in any cardinal direction, and you could be out in the wilderness pretty fast just because of the way the Pacific Northwest is. It was a left-leaning city, but very different than it is now. It was much more of a, I'd say, mainstream left-leaning, but people also had dialogues. My parents were always kind of on the conservative side, but most of their friends, just being lawyers and then living in Portland, most of their friends were on the left. And I just remember my parents growing up and having like actual discussions with people about politics, and nobody really getting deeply offended or mad. People stayed friends and all that. So it was an interesting place to grow up, a great place to grow up. But then as I left, I saw Portlandia and all that kind of come up, and Portland was still weird and quirky. But I think in the last 10 years, it's just kind of gone off the rails with the way that people have really bought into that hyper woke ideology that has a militant stream to it. And then for whatever reason, the local leaders in Portland just refused to start enforcing laws, and that goes back to a couple of years, and it's just eroded drastically ever since.
Do your parents, not to get them in trouble or canceled, were they ideologically tend to the left, or were they more centrist or to the right growing up?
I'd say center right. I think when they were in college, they were a little bit too young for Vietnam, but they grew up with that, so there was a little bit of a the bad taste that the American people had coming out of Vietnam. I think they probably had some of that. But then the 80s, Reagan was pretty successful president. So they were conservative, and then they started making their own money. My dad eventually went into practice on his own, started employing people. And so when he started paying those taxes and seeing kind of how the world worked, I think he had his, the natural progression and became more of a, centrist Republican.
It is amazing. Like everybody who tends to think that they're left, if you become self-employed or you want to operate your own business and you start dealing with the paperwork and the regulations that the government imposes, you quickly realize even if you wanted to be left, the government makes it very hard to stay left. And I went through the same experience when I opened my own law firm before having enough with it. It's like payroll taxes, deductions at source, and you got taxes, GST, QST. Then you've got the bar. You got to keep your accounting in order. It's like one regulation after another. But we've got to get to the military side of this because this is where I think the bulk of the shaping of who you are comes into play. I would imagine you're 41 years old. So 9/11 comes around, you're 21, 22. When you sign up when you're 18, this is not on the radar of anything. So I would imagine, in as much as your parents might have been reluctant, I would not say disappointed, but maybe scared that you joined the military, this wasn't even on the radar. How does it go from getting into the military, getting the training, and then 9/11 coming around, and what's your parents' reaction to all of this?
Yeah, so I think you're right. When I joined, they're like, well, he's been talking about it forever. He's going to join. He'll get college paid for, and he'll probably get out because he'll be bored in a couple of years because there was no major combat. The military was just kind of doing these routine, maybe some peacekeeping here and there, but there wasn't a big war on the horizon. So I set my sights on going to Ranger Regiment, got to go right there. The Ranger Regiment's a pretty incredible unit in the U.S. military, that they were on a war footing and trained for war even when I got there in 1998. So we had a couple of veterans from the incursion into Panama, some guys that actually parachuted into combat there. And then we had a couple guys that had switched over from the 3rd Ranger Battalion who were in 2nd Ranger Battalion, which is where I ended up, who were veterans of the Mogadishu gunfight. So there was a huge focus there on, we will go to war at some point. A lot of us didn't believe it just because of the way that the country was at the time. I enlisted when Bill Clinton was the president. So we didn't think we were going to ever really go to war. But all the old timers, the guys that have been around for a while, they're like, hey, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Like, it's going to happen someday. So after 3 years in Ranger Regiment, it was an incredible experience. Gave me a really good foundation of soldiering and discipline. I volunteered to go to selection for Special Forces. And so I was actually in Special Forces selection, the 30-day tryout, essentially, you have to see if you have what it takes to go try to become a Green Beret. I was there when the towers fell, when we were attacked. So we went pretty much from being on a peacetime footing to, war footing almost overnight. And so then I think my parents had some pretty big apprehension about what was going to happen next.
I've got to ask this from the personal perspective. Like, how do you, as a human, as a son, as a sibling, oldest of 5, I mean, what's the moment leaving like when you're going into actual, not just war, but all out war, what has shaken the world. And I guess at the time you have no idea what you're getting into. You have no idea how long it's going to go on for, but you know that it's real war. What is the moment like when you actually leave your country, your family, to go there? What is that like for you and your family?
It's probably because I was pretty young. I was very excited. I mean, this is what I had joined the Army to do in 98, and I wanted a chance to prove myself. Thanks to the types of units that I went to, Ranger Regiment and going to Special Forces, I was very well trained. So, I mean, I think the only analogy is, I was somewhat of a professional athlete that had never gotten to go actually play a live game. So it was our chance to go play a live game. So you have I'd say, like, the pregame jitters and anxiety. Are you going to be able to live up to your training and actually perform? There was some of that, but really it was just I was very excited to get the chance to go. So I was in training for the initial push into 9/11, and then same thing, I was in training for like the initial ground war into Iraq. So with my experience from the late 90s, I thought, hey, I might have missed my chance to go to war, because we didn't think at the time. It sounds funny to say now after 20 years of continuous combat, but early in the war on terror, we didn't think that we were going to be in this cycle of continual combat. So I was afraid I was going to miss my shot. So by the time I actually left my family and went over the first time, I was like, thank God it's not over. I'm actually going to get to go and be part of this war, which is what I joined the military to do. So yeah, it sounds weird reflecting on it now, but it was mostly just excitement.
And what were you doing? I mean, I don't know anything about the respective roles of the military personnel. Like, what was your functions and what were you doing actually on the day-to-day in Iraq?
So Green Berets, Special Forces, have a pretty unique mission. Our job is to work with local forces, either to build up a network to overthrow a government, or a network of locals to help us go after terrorist groups. So when I first got into Iraq, we were supposed to go out and find the deck of cards, if you remember that. So there was Saddam Hussein and all his henchmen. They put on this deck of cards. The theory at the time, and it sounds funny to say now, if we capture these bad guys, then we'll be able to put in this Iraqi government that's going to overnight kind of become successful, peaceful, and stable. Obviously that turned out to not work out so hot, but we were initially kind of laser focused on going after the deck of cards. Shortly after we got into country, Zarqawi, who was like the founder of ISIS, founder of Al Qaeda in Iraq, he bombed the UN headquarters famously, and that kind of kicked off the big Al-Qaeda push. So we started going after those guys. After the first couple months, though, we got a really unique, very classic special forces mission of demobilizing a bunch of the former anti-Saddam militias and putting them into a cohesive unit to form one of the first units of the new Iraqi army. So we kind of had a front row seat to a bunch of the mistakes that we made of kind of firing the Iraqi military because of their affiliations with the Ba'ath Party, and then cobbling together a couple different Shia militias and then a couple different Kurdish militias into what eventually became the Iraqi Special Forces. So it was a very interesting, exciting time.
Now, one interesting thing about the military training aspect, to go back a little bit, is the democratizing effect it has. Can you describe that? That the way that military training sort of helps not only sort of build a certain kind of patriotic and disciplined structure of personal life, but really sort of introduces Americans in a sort of you're basically forced to democratize and accept and understand people from a wide range of life and cultures and histories and the rest. What was that your experience, and could you describe that?
Very much, yeah, that was. It's probably the most. I can't think of any other institution in American life that does this. So if you enlist in the Army, the Navy, the Marines, you're gonna go to your initial training, your basic training, which everybody sees the movies of, where they're yelling at you, and it's the process of taking you from a civilian to a soldier. But really, what's incredible is what you said is they take people from all different walks of life, all different parts of our huge country. So I was, I remember distinctly, I was right next to a kid, first, my last name's Kent, his last name was Kennedy. So we were bunk buddies, and he was from Boston, Massachusetts. I had never heard like a legit Boston accent before, but the next kid that was right across from us had like this thick Alabama accent, which I had never heard before, and everybody had their different slang and different cultures. There's black guys, white guys, Hispanic guys, Asian guys, and they cobble you all together, and through essentially shared suffering, you kind of become all the other BS that would be kind of in your way or would be like a social barrier. Man, the first time that they put you through the ringer of stripping off your civilian clothes and throwing you in a set of Army camouflage and having you guys all do push-ups till you can't do push-ups anymore together, like, then you all realize you're in it together. And so for the next couple months, that just becomes your. And so by the time you've been in the Army for like a year or so, there's different groups based on rank and based on jobs, but all the other crap that's kind of part of American life, especially now because we talk about it so much with the culture, it's just stripped away. I mean, it's really a beautiful process.
Yeah, and it's an amazing thing. Some people look at it and say it's the dehumanizing removal of individual identity. But
yeah,
typically, from my experience, the people who say that are not the people who have gone through it. And
right.
Whereas your experience is the exact opposite. It's the unifying of humanity.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, sorry. There's a little lag. Go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
Oh no, I mean, like you said, you all kind of realize that whatever weird social barrier there would have been before, like that it just doesn't matter anymore, because you're all in the same fight. You're there even if you're not there for the same reasons, because there were some guys like me who were like, I want to be a commando, and other guys were like, man, I'm just here for the college money. Like, I don't want to be super soldier or anything. But at the end of the day, you're all there together. You're wearing the same uniform. So yeah, it's an awesome process.
Now, how does the getting into the Rangers work? I mean, I know the difficulties of making the Green Berets. Is it somewhat similar with getting into the Rangers?
Yeah, it's a little bit different of a process, and the Ranger Regiment takes guys a little bit younger. So you go to your basic training, and then you go to your infantry school, which is all down there at Fort Benning. When I went, you went to jump school, and so you jump out of airplanes. I think they do it backwards now. Then you go to a selection process to get into Ranger Regiment, and that's about a month long. They've changed it a little bit here and there because of the war. When I went, it was just really a lot of not sleeping, not eating, and a lot of physical training just to get people to quit, to see who really wants to be there, who's gonna stick it out. So and then you go to Ranger Regiment, you have another year or so to prove yourself worthy, and then you go to Ranger School, which is a 3-month leadership school where, again, you're not eating, you're not sleeping, but you're actually having to lead people on combat patrols. And again, that's another place where they strip away your rank, and everybody's kind of an equal, and you guys are all there in the same boat together, trying to just get through this difficult experience, but you're also having to be in leadership positions at different times. So it's a very much a leadership school, and that kind of solidifies your place in the Ranger Regiment. Some guys that go to that school, the vast majority go back out to the Army to help fill leadership roles in the Army. But the Ranger Regiment kind of retains a certain amount of guys just to do the special operations light infantry mission.
So how much of the training is more psychological than it is physical?
I would say most of it is psychological. You do have to be in, a certain base level of physical fitness, but it's not what you think in the movies. It's not guys that look super ripped or super, they're not super athletes. There's some standards there, and if you look at any of the standards, they're not incredibly difficult. But when you start taking away people's, their sleep, and there's a repetition over and over again, you'll see who wants to be there. So I think most of it is really in your head. You find that place that you can go to where like, all right, I'm not going to quit no matter how bad it gets. And that's what they're looking for in a lot of these initial selection processes. And then in something like Ranger School, it's very psychological, and it's also very social too, because you're having to deal with, again, a wide variety of people from different skill sets in the military, and you're having to put them all together and lead them when they haven't eaten very much in a couple of days, and no one's really slept much in a week. So it's definitely a good leadership experience, but very, very way more mental than I think most people would think at just looking at it on the surface.
Okay, and one last question about the training. I was listening to on Jack Murphy, and you were describing the training before heading into combat. And I'm curious in terms of how do you train for combat, what the training is like, and then what it's like when you actually get into combat, and what combat is like if it's what I imagine like living under 24/7 constant threat where you are constantly on awareness, and whether or not you can ever get that type of preparation in training compared to what it's actually like.
Yeah, so I was really lucky. Going to Ranger Regiment initially, I got a really good base of physical fitness, like marksmanship, and being able to be tactically proficient, how to kick indoors, clear rooms, do ambushes, raids, because Rangers eat, sleep, and breathe that stuff. It's exactly what you'd imagine if you were just to say, hey, what are commandos doing right now? Rangers are out there doing that and practicing that every day. So I had 3 years of really good training and repetitions of that, thanks to the Ranger Regiment, and thanks to some of those veterans who came before me who were veterans of Mogadishu, Panama. I think that training really kept me alive and gave me a foundation. Special Forces is very unique because of our job is to go into these different foreign lands and foreign cultures and essentially train our own reinforcements, train up the next army, train up the next militia, the resistance, whatever it is. So the training I was describing with Jack is this exercise called Robin Sage, and it's the culmination of being a Green Beret. And this is pretty unique to just Special Forces. You go in and you actually have to build up your own resistance network in this town in North Carolina, made up of real people who aren't soldiers. There's a couple key role players there that play the roles of like the resistance leader, your guerrilla chiefs. So they have a script they're operating off of. They have a lot of poetic license based on their experience because they're all retired Green Berets who had some sort of an experience leading militias essentially. But the troopers that you're training up, your little guerrillas, we call them G's for guerrilla. They're anything from the local Boy Scout troop to a bunch of kids from ROTC who've never really seen a gun before. So it's very much what you'd actually get in the real world if you're trying to build up this resistance army. So that training right there, they do a good job of keeping you thinking on your feet and keeping you constantly uncomfortable. It's very much controlled chaos, which is kind of what combat is, especially the way that Special Forces puts their guys into combat. So I think that Robin Sage training combined with, I think, the tactical training I got in Ranger Regiment made me probably about as well prepared as someone can be for combat, but there's really no comparison. I mean, the first time you're actually in combat, you're like, oh, we're playing for keeps, man. It's real bullets in my gun, and the guys we're going after, they probably have real bullets in their guns too. So, I mean, the first time I like really got shot at, I do remember thinking like, oh crap, this is real. And then having that brief moment where I was like, why are they shooting at me? Like, oh yeah, that's right. I just invaded their country. Of course they're shooting at me. So there's that there too. But it's something that you really can't replicate. And so you eventually do get used to it. You get used to kind of constantly having to be aware of what's going on. Because even when we're on our bases, which were supposed to be relatively secure, I mean, we were getting rocketed and mortared kind of every night. So you're always waiting for the alarm to go off or wait for gunfire from the front gate to go off. And eventually we went and we were living just in houses in the city. And that's a whole different environment there too, where you don't have a lot of backup. So it's just the relationships that you've built with your local Iraqis, your local partner force, whoever they were, because they're kind of your security. And basically if they wanted to kill you at any given time, they could, because there's only like a handful of us living there with them. So it's definitely a state of constant alert. That sort of becomes your new normal.
How do you learn to trust people in that environment when they're strangers to you initially?
I mean, there's all kinds of little tricks you can do, and but really, that's where being comfortable with being uncomfortable kind of comes in. That's kind of what you're getting paid. That's what you're getting paid for. I mean, SF guys make just a tiny little bit more money than your regular trooper out there. So there is a certain amount of controlled risk taking. There's a right way to do it. There's a wrong way to do it. And you don't really know what that is until you see it. So there's no like textbook answer. The first time I got put in a situation where it was just me and a handful of Iraqis that I had just given AK-47s to, it's like, well, this has to get done. It feels a little bit wrong. These guys have more to lose by killing me right now than they do to gain. So you definitely have to be aware enough of what the situation is, politically where they're coming from. We also get training in language. So having a rudimentary understanding of their language and their culture is very, very helpful. You don't have to be fluent in Arabic or whatever language you're operating in. But it does, for guys that are like, I don't want to have to learn a foreign language. The first time you're surrounded by a bunch of guys with guns that speak that foreign language, that's when people are like, oh man, learning a language is actually pretty important. So it's it's definitely an interesting experience. And, I think really just understanding what the political situation is and what they would gain from turning their guns on you becomes kind of your number one defense.
Now I've got to ask the other question. Does that type of experience make it easier or harder to trust people outside of an actual wartime setting?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it kind of makes it easier. You're constantly doing that math in your head of like, what's this person have to gain by doing something against me? But then after a while, you're kind of like, this is really weird because I'm back in my hometown. Like, why am I thinking that way? So you after a while, you attempt to, I think, build up the mental capacity to shift gears, but to a certain extent, it is always kind of working in the back of your head, even if it's not necessarily kill you, but do something against you. If you let it go unchecked, it can make you a very not a very trusting person.
Well, I was going to ask about that. How much because I've heard this description a lot from ex-military, particularly special ops guys, is that they learn the ability to turn it off and turn it on. And yeah. I was wondering how much of that comes from training versus how much of that comes from experience in the field.
I think it's just experience in the field. I don't know how you could train. I know that's something that we are probably spending a good deal of money on with psychologists, with mental performance coaches. We invest a lot in sports science and special operations, and some of it's really good and really helpful. But in general, I think it's just a repetition thing. And we've had, 20 plus years of continual war. And the way guys adjusted, the way I've adjusted before, you figure out what works for you. Some people it's going not talking to anybody for a couple of days and just kind of doing your own thing, and some people it's jumping right back in. But it's something that you kind of have to build up on your own. It's sort of like jumping out of an airplane. So the more high stress situations you're in, you do sort of build up some sort of a tolerance to it. But at the same time, everybody has a different mantra they say or think before they jump out of an airplane, I think. And coming back from combat is kind of the same thing. So you have to find your own mental gear shift, and then also know when your mental gear shift is not working anymore and when you need to step away.
Yeah. To what degree, how hard was it for you the first time you came back from combat to ordinary civilian life?
Well, it was hard because I didn't want to leave. We were actually having a really good deployment, a really exciting deployment. We had a lot of autonomy. But I knew that we had, basically by that point of the war, we knew that we were coming right back over in 6 months. So it was kind of like, all right, I'll see you guys. Said to the Iraqis, all right, I'll see you in 6 months. And I knew I was going to do some neat military schools and kind of have some fun. So it was, it wasn't very difficult, again, because special operations is just so tight knit that, you're going back home with your team, and then you're going to all go out you're going to party, and then some guys are going to go to different schools, which are kind of neat. You're going to get to go drive cars really fast, or go scuba diving, or jump out of airplanes and shoot guns. So it's that lifestyle, And I didn't have a family. I wasn't married then for many, many years. It was much harder on the guys who were married and had families. By the time I got married and had a family and had to deploy, I actually went back to some of my old friends who were married at the time, and I was like, I'm sorry, this was way harder than I thought it was when I was, 23, 24. But yeah, for me, where I was in life, it wasn't that difficult at the time.
So,
sorry, go ahead, Robert.
I was saying, Baltimore guy wants to know if you're a Bushmaster. I have no idea what that means.
I don't know what it means either, and I was too scared to ask the question.
I don't know what that is either. Yeah.
So, Joe, I mean, this is the part of the story. I mean, it was in the video that you posted to Twitter, and I don't know, for anybody who doesn't know, you're a Gold Star husband. So, I mean, explain to everybody watching how you met your wife. I was in the video briefly, but explain how you met her, kids, and what ended up happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So my wife, Shannon Kent, she also was in the military. She enlisted right out of 9/11. So she's originally from New York City. Her father and her uncle were New York City first responders. Dad's a New York City or New York State trooper, and then uncle was a Staten Island firefighter. So that happened. The towers went down. She was in college, quit college, enlisted in the Navy right away. Her and her younger brother, who's still in the Marines to this day, went. That was their call to action, joined the military. Shannon knew she had a knack for languages. She self-taught French and Spanish. So she basically went to their recruiters and said, like, I can learn Arabic, put me in. And they did. So the Navy was the first ones that said, hey, we'll let you go learn Arabic at the Defense Language Institute. So she went, learned Arabic. She kind of got into the special operations community before women were formally allowed into the special operations community, thanks to her language ability. So she specialized in collecting signals intelligence and then human intelligence. So running sources and building networks, that type of thing. Thanks to her language skill, really. So she started working with Naval Special Warfare, the Navy SEALs. We met briefly in Baghdad in 2007 because she was briefing me and some guys on my team on where some bad guys we were after were. I talked to her for like 10 minutes, kicked myself for years for not, talking to her more. But pace of the war, I went somewhere else. She went somewhere else. I didn't see her again until about 6 years later in 2013. We both got picked up for another special operations unit that puts together intelligence professionals and special operators. So it's a joint unit, SEALs, Rangers, Green Berets, and then intelligence people like Shannon. So we ended up in some training together, hit it off, fell in love, got married about a year later, started having kids, had 2 sons, Colt and Josh. So Shannon took a little bit of time where she was working up at the NSA, doing vital stuff for our country, but being able to kind of be a mom at the same time while I was deploying. And then in 2018, she got tapped for a deployment, one of the final pushes into Syria to go defeat the Territorial Caliphate. So she deployed right after Thanksgiving 2018. Tragically, 2 months later, her and 3 other Americans were killed by a suicide bomber in Syria.
I have to say, it's the most impossible question in the world to ask. How do you cope with that? How do you deal with that? How do you work that into your life without, I don't want to say without giving up. How do you deal with that type of tragedy and move on?
Yeah, it's tough. I had to step away completely from government service. So I had retired from the military. I went to work for the CIA, which is a pretty natural transition for guys in special operations. But I realized I was on a shorter deployment when she was killed. So I was overseas as well. And so I kind of had an epiphany. I was like, well, today was already the worst day of my life, but it could have been worse for our kids because I could have gotten killed too. And then they would have been orphans. So I went back and resigned immediately, kind of moved back here to the Northwest to get my kids closer to my family. And, had every intention of just being a stay-at-home dad, essentially. Got a job as a project manager for an IT firm where I can work from home, and really just wanted to focus on the kids. So that was a big thing, was stepping away from my former life of deploying and being in danger constantly. So it's difficult. I mean, having the young kids as young as they were, I think really kept me focused on, hey, I have a choice to make. I can either kind of get sucked down into grief, and that's bad for the kids too, or I can do my best to move forward and give the kids the best life possible, like I had when I was growing up, get them into a positive environment where they're close to my parents, just kind of base everything around them. So that was the thought process, but it was day by day. But really just having the two young sons to take care of, it's just really kept me sane, despite all the tragedy.
How old are your two sons?
So they were 1 and 3 when Shane was killed. They're one's about to be 4 and the other one's about to be 6 this summer.
So you go back to Oregon. To what degree at what point did you start to witness the change of what was taking place in Oregon?
Almost immediately. Yeah, almost immediately, really. I mean, just the culture was different. Antifa had kind of come on the scene, I think, around 2017. It wasn't constant until 2020 after the riot started after the Chauvin incident. But there was already just a bad vibe in Portland. The ICE occupation had happened before, where the city and the feds essentially stopped communicating. The city government said they wouldn't work with the FBI. They wouldn't reinforce ICE. The ICE building got taken down and pretty much trashed. Antifa would set up random checkpoints, essentially, like I used to see overseas with terrorist organizations, and the police weren't allowed to do anything about it. And if they did, they'd arrest people. They'd be released because the DA just wouldn't charge anybody. So I already saw like a real bad law and order issue in Portland developing. And there was the parallel that I saw from what I saw overseas. I was in Iraq right after Saddam fell, and Saddam kept a lid on a lot of violence in that society, but it wasn't necessarily a violent society right after we took out Saddam. But it was palpable. You could feel that there was violence brewing underneath the surface, because there was different groups that were gaining momentum and they were using violence as a tool. I felt that same thing on the streets of Portland, especially after the riots started, because there was a lot of people that were supporting the violence or justifying it, saying, well, this is because of these narratives that just didn't make any sense. Systemic racism. Like, well, what are you talking about? Because that happened in, Minnesota. Why are we attacking the city building here? People didn't have a concrete answer for that, but they were like, this is inherently good and I'm going to support it. So I could feel that momentum that violence has, that if you haven't felt it before, you don't know what it is. But to me, it felt more like something I experienced overseas. So I made the decision to get the heck out of Portland, essentially, and just kind of go right across the river, which is the 3rd Congressional District, because I knew growing up it was a traditional conservative area. It was still a red area, but close enough to where my parents were in Portland. But yeah, it's I can't put my finger on exactly when it was, but I think sometime, in the late 2000s, Portland kind of went off the rails with letting a lot of really bad elements into the city and have power.
Now, where do you think you're going to have how do you think you're going to have your kids educated because of what's happening in the public school system?
Yeah, my kids are in private school. I mean, that's bottom line, private Christian school. I mean, I grew up in the public schools. I knew I had some teachers that leaned left. But we had conversations, and I don't feel like I can look back now, seeing how much the left has crept into the institutions, and kind of think, okay, yeah, I can see that was starting. But it wasn't pervasive. I wasn't anti-public schools up until like 2 years ago, and now it's just like, I can't put my kids in that, and then especially with the way the teachers unions have weaponized the COVID lockdowns, there's no way I'm gonna have my kids the mercy of those buffoons. So they're in private schools right now.
And so, what do you think in terms of on the CIA? They have a recent commercial. I mean, since you worked there, where they're promoting wokeness, and it's like, what? Well, what's your take on that?
And I'll read this question that came up in the chat. It says, Viva, could you please ask how he will address the public's current lack of faith with the CIA and those associated with it? I think these two questions go hand in hand, but sure. Now we're getting into the substantive policy discussion. Yeah.
So I get this a lot, actually. So the CIA and I think the FBI, I was never in the FBI, but I think the FBI to a certain extent too, the people that go and actually join those organizations, they're hard to get into. They're pretty elite. They want to go forward and they want to serve their country. The problem is the political leadership. So your average CIA guy who's a case officer whose job is to go out and recruit spies and steal secrets. That's the CIA's bread and butter. And then their analytical core is to make sense of all that. And this is very vital stuff that our country absolutely needs. It all has a foreign focus because it's the CIA legally. But the problem is the the way that the political class in DC deals in power. So if you want to be a good political operative in DC, you align yourself with one of the parties, you get an appointment in these different places. If you're a career person and the military is the same way too. If our senior officers, our senior generals, if you want to hedge your bets for your next job at the higher level, then you tend to lean a little bit to the left, just because that's a safe place to be in DC. There's more think tank jobs there. There's more industry jobs there. So then you become way more politically motivated. And you see guys like John Brennan, who came up in the ranks of the CIA, but he stopped being a ground level guy pretty early on in his career. He was more concerned with staying in the Beltway and making relationships. The next thing you know, he's taken the agency completely off the rails. So I think what we need people who understand how these agencies work, who understand what the core mission of them is. Just like the military. The military's job is to fight and win wars. It's to kill people and break things. It's not to, say, hey, we just had our first all gay helicopter crew. Isn't that great? Like, that's not the military's job. Who cares? I don't care if they're gay. Like, can they fly a helicopter? That's what matters. And it's the same thing with the intelligence community. So we need people that understand that and are willing to go in and gut this political class that's in there. And I don't think anyone can do that really hasn't been in the inside before, because I think a problem we have with a lot of our elected officials is they didn't serve in the military, and the intelligence community is really murky to them. And when they're in the hot seat, when they're the ones that have to make decisions, they get these very impressive, intimidating generals that come in and say, well, you can't cut this program. You can't cut that program. We can't leave this war because then it's going to be on you that we're just going to get attacked by all these terrorists. The intelligence community comes in there, if they're double speaking, they says, well, we can't tell you the real secrets. They're classified. We can't tell you why all 17 agencies say that white supremacy is the number one threat in America, but you just have to trust us. It's super duper secret, just like that, all the Russian intel. So I think we need people that can go in and really hold these guys to account to restore these organizations to what they're supposed to be. Like the CIA has a vital role to play in this, like making this crazy video they just made about all the different intersectional buzzwords that she used, whatever that video is supposed to do. Like, that's not the mission of the CIA. That's not how they should be recruiting people.
Well, what do you say to people who think that it's beyond repair and that it is impossible to right that particular ship, that it is hell-bent on politicizing or being politicized to the point of weaponizing its power for political purposes and not for any form of legitimate purpose?
I understand that criticism. I mean, I totally do. And I would probably share that had I not been on the inside. What we need, and this is the same thing the military needs, our system is designed to have civilian rule. The problem is, especially after 9/11 for our generation, is people kept saying, hey, we need to just give the military and the CIA a blank check because we never want another 9/11 to happen. And we're not going to ever question these guys when they say, open up your checkbooks, or, hey, I can't tell you I can't show it to you. You just got to trust me. I mean, human nature, if you told any organization, hey, you pretty much have an unlimited budget and we're never really going to check in on you, and you can fall back on saying like it's classified, I guarantee you that organization of human beings would go off the rails. And that's where the intelligence community is, I think. And that's where I think a lot of the military is. But what they need, there is some draining of the swamp that needs to go on where people get fired. But the professionals that are out there willing to put their lives on the line, they need that civilian oversight. What we lacked when I was in the military, especially for the whole global war on terror, is we lacked civilian leadership that said, hey, guys, I want you to go into Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, all these places for a distinct reason, and then we're going to get you out. We've just had these ill-defined, like, hey, go to these countries and maybe do nation building, maybe build democracy. I can't tell you what that is, what that looks like. You guys tell me. And so it's just become this self-licking ice cream cone of waste in blood, waste in treasure. So I understand the argument that it's beyond repair, but I do think with the adequate civilian oversight, if Congress was doing its oversight role, we wouldn't be in this predicament to begin with, and if the American people were better at holding our president, more accountable too, I don't think we'd be in this predicament. So I think strict congressional oversight and really opening up the books. And if you can't explain something to the American people, like as to why we're at war or as to why we're doing an intelligence program, then it probably doesn't need to exist in the first place.
What's your thoughts? We interviewed in a recent Sidebar, J.D. Vance, who described that, similar sort of objective, patriotic agenda, goes off to Iraq. But he says about a year after being there, he came to distrust the political directives that were taking place and whether they could be achieved through military means.
Yeah.
At what point did you start having doubts about what the actual goal and objective was and whether it was attainable by military means?
It's probably a couple years. Well, it's probably a couple years in. So when I was 23 was my first combat deployment. And when we started demobilizing a lot of the anti-Saddam militias, I had done as much reading as I could to be smart in the situation. So I was reading about some of the anti-Saddam militias, and a couple of them were clearly coming across the border from Iran. That one of them had their name was the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, deeply funded by Iran. They're still in the government today. They're bad actors. And I was like, I don't know, this seems like a really bad idea. And all of us were kind of like, hey, we just fired all the guys, all the Ba'ath Party members who actually knew how to run this country. This seems like a bad idea. But, being a 23-year-old sergeant at the time, I was like, nah, somebody knows better than me. What do I know, man? They told me to go do this job. I'm going to go do my job. So probably about another, year or so in, I was like, actually, especially once I got exposed to some of the more senior ranking guys who were making some of these plans and how the plans were playing out on the ground, I was like, this is garbage. And these guys at the top level, they're pushing a political agenda, mostly because they don't want to say they got it wrong. So they're continuing to double down on these bad ideas like, hey, let's, for one, go into Iraq. Two, let's fire the entire Iraqi government. And then let's build up primarily Shia militants as the backbone of the new Iraqi military and the new Iraqi government. So about a year into that, I probably had about the same, a year or two into it, I probably had about the same epiphany of like, hey, we're here executing really bad policy, but we're too stubborn to say we got it wrong. And that's a place where I think, had we had some really honest leadership at the civilian side to just grab the military and say, hey, is any of this actually working? Be honest with me, and do their due diligence. The military could have been like, not really. What do you guys want us to do here? And then I think it would have been the responsible thing for the civilian leadership to just at least tell the American people, like, we thought this happened, and now we're changing course because we're not going to just continue to double down on failure. But the gambler's fallacy, the reason why casinos are built in Las Vegas, it applies to, I think, a lot of human nature. You just keep thinking like, hey, if I keep trying this, eventually it's going to work, right? Because if we just throw enough money and resources at it, it'll work at some point. But
no, I
just never seemed to happen.
I have a similar philosophy with the COVID lockdowns and what's been going on over the last year. Is that at a given point you've lost so much, you just abandon any hope of recouping it. And you just say, well, maybe I'll get something back at the end of the day. And it's a George Orwell quote. I'm going to screw it up, but the idea is the purpose of the war was never to be won, but rather to endure forever. And someone had asked the question, like how much of your action was actually hampered by, crippling rules of engagement on the ground, and at what are you fully disillusioned with the Americans' interventions internationally, or do you how do you draw the line at a justified intervention versus a political one?
I'm very disillusioned with the interventions of, I'd say, my lifetime and my career, because it all depends on what you're going to do with an intervention. So after 9/11, I mean, we had to go into Afghanistan. We had to get Al-Qaeda. That was a no-brainer. I mean, even prior to Afghanistan, had Bill Clinton acted decisively, there's multiple times that we could have dismantled Al-Qaeda before 9/11 happened. I mean, bin Laden declared war on us in 1997. Then he bombed 2 embassies, and then he bombed the USS Cole. The whole time we knew where he was. So an appropriate intervention where we did a targeted strike, or we sent in some guys on the ground to snatch them or to kill them, that makes sense to me. Don't let problems become absolute nightmares and fester. That makes sense. When you start getting into these more lofty ideas of, hey, it's our responsibility to go in and either take down a bad government and build a new government in our image, because we think eventually these people are just going to be like, hey, thanks for this gift of democracy and become our new best friends. Well, that's never actually worked. That's never happened before. So I'm very skeptical on those. And then, I mean, that's the neoconservative ideology. I mean, I'm boiling it down a good deal, but the neoliberal ideology of anywhere something bad happens, it's a humanitarian crisis, and it's our responsibility to use military might to go in and protect human life anywhere. Because to me, that's just Pandora's box of, well, I guess we're just going to go to war with pretty much everywhere, right? Because there's bad stuff happening all over the entire world. So to me, if we can't state what our very clear military objective is, then I have a hard time saying like, this is a good idea. This is worth us putting Americans in harm's way and worth us potentially getting involved in this area. So yeah, it's definitely really soured me on any kind of war where people, if you can't clearly define the objective, you can't clearly explain it to the American people why you're going, what the end state looks like, then we just shouldn't be doing it, and then it's not ready for military action.
And when did you come to that conclusion? Or was it a building one? Was it a sudden one?
It was definitely, building. I mean, once I kind of realized what we were doing in Iraq, that it wasn't the strategic vision, as ill-defined as it was, the idea that we were going to build this Iraqi government, I just didn't think that. I was like, this isn't possible. The way that we've set the deck. That's not to say that the Iraqis can't have their own form of government. I think they can. They're actually a fairly normal, sophisticated society, because prior to Saddam, they had a really robust economy. The education was high there. What Saddam did to the country, what sanctions did to the country, what constant war has done to the country has put it, back decades, if not longer, unfortunately. But I just am very skeptical on us going, a bunch of guys from America going to a place like Iraq and being like, guys, good news, we figured this out, just do what we say. Like it just, it was probably, to answer your question, it's probably just a few years into that. I felt deeply committed to continue to go back because I had built up so much experience on the ground. It's like, this is what the country is doing, especially as the violence ticked up. I felt that I could go over and at least make a difference to help bring some of my friends home. It's part of your culture. It's some guys don't make it home, and so then you begin to think like, well, why would I come home and then not go back if everybody else is going back? What makes me special? Why do I get to get off the ride? It's kind of what keeps you going back.
Now let's get into the big thing, the congressional run. So
yeah,
at what point, I mean, you got to explain to people out there who you come from war in the Middle East and now you want to get involved in politics in war. I mean, I guess it'll be in Washington State, but you want to get involved in politics, possibly the nastiest, most cutthroat industry, for lack of a better word, that there is out there. How do you make that decision to knowingly, I would say, compromise your sanity and your future by hoping to get involved in politics? And then we're going to get into some policy questions. But how do you get to this? How do you get to that determination in your mind to willingly go into that?
So this happened pretty quick. After Shannon was killed, she was killed at like a pretty pivotal time in the Trump administration. So she was killed in January of 19. In December of 18, so just a month before, President Trump famously tried to get us out of Syria because he had done pretty much what I just talked about. He stated a clear military objective. He said ISIS is bad. The territorial caliphate had taken over at that time 2 countries, almost 3 if you count Libya. And they held territory. They held territory that was in proximity to Europe, which was creating a refugee crisis into Europe, but also giving terrorists the ability to make their way into Europe. And then from there, open season, all they got to do is get a plane ticket. They could come to America easily. That was their aspiration. They wanted to inspire attacks against the West. A very clear-cut military objective. How we got there, that's a different story. But when Trump came into power and into the presidency, that was very much the most pressing national security issue. So he did what no other president in my lifetime had done. And he said, we're going to go over there, we're going to crush the caliphate, and we're going to get out. And he enabled the commanders on the ground to use that. We took out the territorial caliphate. I fought in Iraq against ISIS under Obama. And it was essentially we were at war, but we didn't have the authorizations really to go out and decisively crush the enemy. So we were there, we were at danger, we were losing people, not that many, but we still lost some great Americans there. And we were still spending billions of dollars rebuilding the Iraqi army again for like the second time, because every time they got put up to the test, they would drop their guns and run. Not all the units, but some. But seeing the contrast between Obama and Trump was very refreshing, and seeing that Trump had decisively used military force, he deserved to be very much commended for by the national security community. However, he exposed their failures by saying, hey, you guys got it all wrong. This is how you do it. So when he tried to get our troops out, that began a huge dissent within the deep state, the swamp, lack of a better term. Secretary of Defense Mattis publicly resigned. Running to the media and saying, well, Trump doesn't know what he's doing. This is essentially the end of the liberal world order, that we want to leave a war. Painting that picture, the media was all too willing to paint Trump as this buffoon that didn't know what he was doing in foreign policy. And despite all the grief that I was going through, I knew that wasn't the case. I had over 20 years on the ground at that point. I had almost 5 years on the ground in Iraq, add it all up together. And so I felt that it was my responsibility to chip in my perspective and say, hey, no, actually Trump knows what he's doing. This is the smartest policy that we've had in a really long time. So after Shannon was killed, I started writing op-eds, going on the news to articulate Trump's foreign policy. That kind of put me a little bit into the political realm. From there, because the Trump administration is a little bit more unconventional, they kind of asked me what I thought as a guy on the ground versus the generals. And I, continued to provide them occasional advice, especially pertaining to Iraq and Syria. I had an invite to go work in a second Trump administration, the National Security Council. So I was planning on doing that. And then 2020 went the way that it did. So seeing the way that the election went down, watching big tech, the mainstream media come in and drive the narrative that Biden won this overwhelming victory, I knew I wanted to do something. I was like, I'm going to get involved somehow to help right this ship that our country's on, because I watched the left tear apart Portland, tear apart Seattle, use them essentially as their militant wing to set the conditions for 2020. They essentially held the country hostage and said, if we don't get what we want, we will burn entire cities. And then what they did with the mail out voting, I knew that I needed to do something. I just didn't know exactly what. I was going to either go work in a political organization of some sort. I was not planning on running for office until Jamie Herrera Butler voted for impeachment. So she's my congresswoman here in the 3rd Congressional District. We're the one little sliver of red in the Pacific Northwest. We're one of 2 red districts that touch the Pacific Ocean on the entire United States West Coast. So what she did by voting for the impeachment of President Trump, in my eyes, she made us vulnerable, because then everybody in Portland, just to our south, Seattle in our north, they can see that we can be manipulated by the far left. We can be manipulated by a narrative, just like these cities can. And to me, that was a line that just could not be crossed. So I've never been somebody who's good with just sitting back saying hey, someone should do something about that. So I figured, hey, let's give it a shot. Let's try and actually put my money where my mouth is. And I did an FEC filing and made my announcement. And I've pretty much been off and running on the campaign trail as much as I can to try and take the district and hold it.
Now, how did you, or what did you go about doing to learn how to run for office?
So I Googled it. I Googled it. That's how I did my FEC filing. I had a good friend of mine who ran for Senate in Virginia, who I served with, a fellow Green Beret. So I called him up and said, hey, what do I got to do? And he was like, man, you got to get your name out there and you got to make money. So we, got the WinRed website set up. The first little bit of money that we made, we hired what I think is a very good team, general consultant. I hired Matt Brainerd. Hired Matt because Matt's big on election integrity. He was the guy that actually, I think, went out and did his homework, found the receipts and the actual evidence of the ballot level fraud. So Matt actually contacted me via social media, the same way we all connected, and said, hey, I think I'd like to help you with your campaign. I was like, I think, our values align, because to me, election integrity is the number one thing going into this election cycle. It's on everyone's mind. Everywhere I go, people from all walks of life, whether it's a businessman or a logger, or a truck driver or a teacher, they all say, how are we going to secure our elections? And so we're coming up with plans for how we're going to do that and how we're going to fully adjudicate 2020. And Matt's a key part of that, as part of my team. So that's kind of been our trajectory. We're definitely getting more formal and looking like a more formal America First campaign at this point. The first couple months, it was, literally just kind of flying by the seat of our pants and building the airplane in flight.
When is what's the time frame? When is the election going to be?
So the primary is in August of 22.
Okay.
And can you explain for people, Washington has a unique primary process?
We do. So we have a jungle primary. So it's basically anybody and it's nonpartisan. So the Republicans and the Democrats don't have their own sorting primary. Everybody and anybody can file and run in August of 22. The top 2 vote getters advance right into the general in November. So it's it is pretty unique. It'd be nice if we had a partisan primary, but we don't have that luxury here.
2022. So you're a year and a half off of this. So this is I'm very impatient. So for this summer would still be too far away. What is your plan of action to go forward just to get elected in a year and a half? Like, what do you have to do between now and then to make that happen?
Excuse me. So we have to get out and we have to meet everybody throughout our whole district. So my district goes, like I said, all the way from the Pacific Ocean, about another 200 miles along the Columbia River Valley Gorge out to agriculture country. And then we go almost up to the doorstep of Olympia, Washington State's capital. So it's a very big district. So I'm trying to be in every county as often as I can to start building out my network of actual experts on the ground who can keep me informed as to all the key issues in their neck of the woods, just so I know what the people of the district want and how they want a representative to represent them in Washington, D.C. So that's very, very important to me. And then obviously doing as much media as we possibly can to get our name out there. And then the fundraising is also key, but I think that's going to take care of itself as we get our message out there and meet with people.
And how do you reach out these days? Because the political landscape and sort of distribution of messages continues to evolve. And that went from being very big TV dominated from about early 80s to maybe about 6-7 years ago. And now increasingly it's micro targeting through social media and through the big platforms. But now you have big tech algorithmic manipulation in play, which is also reducing, whenever they want, whether candidates can even use their mediums to communicate or advertise. What are your intentions or plans, or where do you think the best way is for you to reach voters in that district?
So the social media piece is huge. The traditional ones right now, obviously Twitter and Facebook are really big. But I keep talking about election integrity. So I know one day I'm going to wake up and maybe my account just won't be there anymore. So we're on all the alternatives too. So we're on Telegram, Rumble, Gab, Cloud Hub, all those as well. So it's really just building in contingencies and trying to be as redundant as we can to make sure that the message reaches everywhere. Because a lot of conservatives have kind of they've taken themselves off of Twitter and Facebook because they're just sick of it. So we have to have that redundant messaging built into Parler and Gab, and Telegram is another big one. But I think you're right. The social media is huge. There's still actually a decent amount of people on radio, which I did not know before I became a political candidate. It's good though, because it does reach a lot of folks. The radio does. But the good thing is what I like, I think, a couple of years ago, the mainstream media and the TV and the cable networks, they kind of could monopolize the information a lot more. But I think there's people that are getting their information from such a wide variety of places, especially after 2020 and the way that went, that we can reach people if we're willing to put in the work. And so that's just what we try to do every day. We try and make sure that we're hitting every single different platform digitally, and then also just hitting those grass level community events.
Now,
how do you do the community events? Do you? You can go ahead, VIva.
No, I was just going to say I've been taking screenshots of some questions I want to ask you at the end. My question was only going to be, what's your budget for all of this from here to 2022?
Well, here's the thing. For this congressional district, the going price that everybody who's informed and done their research is, it's $3 to $4 million from where we're at right now to get through the general. So we are raising money as much as we possibly can. So hopefully I'll do a plug at the end of this for a website and where people can find me and all that. But we're trying to do just get as much money as we possibly can, because my opponents, both the establishment Republican I'm going up against, Jamie Herrera Butler, she's got a ton of money from the establishment. She's getting PAC money, I'm sure, from all the Never Trumper organizations. And then whatever crazy Democrat I'm going to go up against, they will spend a lot of money because they want this district bad. So money's definitely a thing.
What media markets are in that district? Because it looks like it overlaps some expensive media markets.
It definitely does. They're all pretty expensive as far as the ad buys and stuff go. I think we're actually getting our most success though off of the social media, off the live streams, probably off this one, off Jack, went on Bannon's War Room as well. That was pretty successful. So yeah, I'm hoping that the social media continues to be the most fruitful avenue.
Now, has the Trump people reached out yet to you? Because I know that he is very committed to making sure those people who voted for his impeachment and the person you're running against
Yeah.
also wanted to be a star witness against
He did,
Trump.
exactly.
In my view, manufacturing testimony, but willing to commit perjury to get Trump thrown out. Have you heard from Trump's people yet as to their involvement?
I have, yeah. So I went to an event at Mar-a-Lago, got to meet some folks, the House Freedom Fund. I got to open up. I got to follow Marjorie Taylor Greene at one of her events. She was very generous to let me come on stage after her. So I'm just trying to get into that space as much as I can while staying connected with the district. Trump's people are definitely in touch with us. I had some contacts there from potentially going and working in a second Trump administration. From what I know of President Trump, though, he wants to see that someone can perform. So right now I'm just going to run the race like I'm in second, make as much money as I can, be on the media as much as I possibly can, show him that I have a plan to win this thing and that it's possible to win this thing. So that's been my main focus, because I think President Trump wants to see someone who's a winner.
Yeah, and a message to Trump people, they need to get involved more early in some of these races. But I've made my voice clear on that, and I'm going to keep making it, because some of the people around him are less than politically capable and competent. But we'll leave that for another story for another day. Don't want to saddle you with it necessarily, but just a little message for those that are watching, and several are. But go ahead, Viva.
I was going to say something. It had to do some policy decisions. Oh, Robert, I just lost my idea.
Oh, well, I was going to ask, in sort of planning out the campaign, are you going to do like town halls? Because like I used to run campaigns back in the day, and you do the chicken circuit. You go to the Rotaries and you go to the Lions Club and all that kind of, and that's always good and useful, because those are community organizations with people that are persuaders and influencers in their local community, particularly for a district that's spread out as yours is geographically, with overlapping cultures and different cultures, I should say, that have their own set of influencers. How are you going to go about doing that, in the sense of, like, it seems like it's increasingly changing? One thing that I thought Tulsi Gabbard did a good job of in New Hampshire was lots and lots and lots of town halls. But what's your ideas in terms of being able to get to a place where you can communicate with as many important people within a community? And by important, I mean they're influencers within that community.
Yeah, so I've already done 3 town halls in our 3 largest counties. I want to do more. We did 2 candidate forums as well. So I'm also planning planning town halls in 2 of our other counties. We're going to do a digital town hall here pretty soon, so people can check out my website for the exact dates and all that. And if we give
the website, plug it now.
Oh, sure.
That was what I was going to say.
You got it. JoeKentForCongress.com. So people can read all my stances on the issues there. If they can donate. I'd really appreciate that. And then under events, we're always going to post where our upcoming events are. We try and blast that on social media as well. We got a digital town hall coming up pretty soon. And if that one gets full, then we'll just buy up another Zoom and we'll do another one probably the next week. I like the in-person town halls, going and introducing myself real quick, saying who I am, why I'm running, and then opening up the floor to people, because I think that's the best way for people to get to know me, and then for me to know what issues matter the most to them.
And how much do you go, like, when I used to run campaigns, we would sometimes just stop at local diners, stop at other places, not, to impose a presence, but to sort of receive messages, see what people are saying, see what people are thinking. How much do you do those aspects as well?
Yep, I've been doing that as well here in my little town. There's a couple different breakfasts that happen with either political groups, religious groups. I try and go to those. One of our more rural communities, I got to go hit a couple diners. Sheriff and a couple of the other local folks were nice enough to take me out, and I was lucky enough to meet a lot of people there. And those are just fun. I mean, I think that's a blast, especially because it's not scripted. There's nobody really, running the show. You just go and meet people, sit down at the table, and have a cup of coffee with them. I think that's really, really, really fun for me, because I get to hear, no filter what's going on, what the truth is.
Anything in particular that's been surprising? Because usually I've always found it fascinating. Campaigns will always be 3 or 4 issues. Didn't even know were an issue. That's a hot issue. That's maybe very local, sometimes national, some specific thing to a specific industry, a specific agricultural group or industrial group. Anything like that you've already experienced?
Yeah. Election integrity. So, I doing my research before I went out and talked to different people in the different parts of the community. My district's very geographically and economically diverse. So, I'm reading up on the forestry issues, the logging issues, the fishing issues, the business issues that pertain to our big city hub. And all that's there, but it's all very much in the background. The first thing that people say to me is, hey, what are we going to do to secure our elections? Like, are we, how can we let the media and what happened in 2020 just slide? Like, we cannot let that die. Like, we actually have to go and we have to fight for that to be adjudicated. And then we have to fight for our elections to be secured. And that's been the first thing on everyone's mind. So, I mean, that's why I say that election integrity is my number one issue. Like, every check that we were supposed to have in 2020 on our system, everybody who was responsible for that, they shirked their duties. You know, Clarence Thomas attempted. He wrote a pretty good dissent that said he thought they should have seen or heard those cases in court. But everybody else just said, like, oh, we really can't look at it. There's standing, there's latches, whatever excuses they came up with. And now we still have this huge lingering mistrust in our system. So I think it's imperative when we take the House and we take the Senate back in 2022 that Congress has a full congressional hearing where we can subpoena witnesses, we can subpoena evidence, we put people under oath, and we bring out the receipts and we show whether there was or there wasn't election fraud. I think there was, but you know what? I want to prove it, you know, and if I can't prove it, then fine. That's cool. Let's at least bring it out and show that to the American people so that they can have confidence and faith in their election system. So that's the biggest issue, I think, that people come up and say to me. And another one, too, which ties into election integrity, is how mad Republicans are at the GOP and at the establishment. Like, they think that they're not being listened to at all. They're, you know, and here in the district, they're mad at Jamie for not listening, Jamie Herrera Butler for not listening to them. But they're also mad at big GOP. And they're saying, you know what, if I don't get America First candidates and I don't get Trump in 2024, like, I'm done. I'm not voting anymore. You know, and so that's been pretty interesting to hear. A lot of people, I think, that were staunch Republicans, no matter what they'd vote for an R, are now saying, like, hey, I'm done, man. Like, if I don't get an America First guy that's going to actually fight, I'm not voting.
Now, what do you have to do to get on the ballot? Do you have to get petitions, or what's the rules in Washington?
You can either do a petition of, I think it's like 1,500 people, or you can just pay $1,500. So it's fairly simple. Yeah.
Joe, I just want to read one of the questions I took a screenshot of was from Jordan L. It said, Viva Barnes, Joe, what would you suggest to a cynical conservative who's lost trust in the legal political system? And what do you, Joe Kent, offer? Yeah,
I mean, I understand why he's cynical and skeptical because of everything that happened in 2020. But they also have to realize that that's built into the Democrats' plan. The far left right now wants to demoralize Republicans as much as they can. Everything they're doing with the culture, everything the Biden administration is doing right now, the little point they're putting on the end of it is their finger in our chest saying, it's all over, lose all hope, don't ever vote again. So they've got to realize that, as natural as that inclination is to just give up hope, that's what the left wants. So that's why we have to double down right now. We have to start a year and a half early and organize and get good candidates out there, and then come out in such a force that they can't cheat and they can't steal it. And then when we do get in there, we have to have that adjudication in Congress. We have to have that congressional hearing to go through and adjudicate the election of 2020. And then we also have to make our voices heard to the GOP to let them know that we're not going to take Mitt Romney's. We're not going to take these 70% Republicans that are just like, yeah, every now and again I vote for tax cuts. Don't you guys want to have me as your elected officials anymore? Like, no, we want people that are actually going to go fight the way that the left is fighting, because this is an information war that's happening on the cultural front, the information space. So we have to put in Republicans that know how to do that. So I think, unfortunately, like, I understand the sentiment where it's just like, man, we got screwed and I'm done. But if we do that, we are totally and completely surrendering to the far left. And the far left is moving at such a lockstep, brutal pace right now that our country will not be the same country that it is right now in just 2 years if we don't fight back.
Yeah, I'm fond of saying that the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing people he didn't exist. The greatest trick the system ever pulled was convincing you that you can't resist. I would assume your experience in the military field and the intelligence field reinforces those principles. That, you know, as you see that people that are willing and have the willpower to pursue their own agenda, good or bad, are able to overcome obstacles that look on paper to be insurmountable. How much has that informed your belief in the ability to make meaningful, positive change?
Yeah, I think it's shaped the foundation of my belief system, and, you know, what's keeping me going in the fight right now. I mean, I'm in this because of how extreme the left is being, and because I got 2 young sons that lost their mother when they were very young, and someday I'm gonna have to look them in the eye and say, hey, this is the country that your mom gave her life fighting for, and the condition we're in right now, the direction we're heading, I can't do that. But I know that sitting sitting on the sidelines and saying like, it's all bad and we just can't do anything about it. That's just not an option. Like everything's impossible until you try. I mean, we're one election right now away from either losing our country or from being able to fix it. If we come out and we have like a Tea Party like revolt in 2022, then we are going to be able to absolutely put up roadblocks to everything Biden's going to do and hold it down until we can get a good Republican like Trump, DeSantis, whatever that combo is going to be in there in 2024. I hope it's President Trump personally. But if we don't fight, if you don't try, it's totally impossible. But if you do try and you show courage and you go out there and you get your just one or two friends involved, however they can be involved, door knocking, becoming a precinct chairman, something like that, any way they possibly can, then we can actually turn the tide around, because we have the majority of this country. Conservatives do. People, hardworking men and women that just want their lives back and want control of their lives. We're the majority of this country. So if we actually get our stuff together, we can push back on all this. We just have to let our friends know who are demotivated that it's very doable. So yeah, my military training, I think that's kind of part and parcel to being successful in the military is having that mentality.
Someone had asked earlier, what are your thoughts on Joint Chiefs lying to Trump about moving troops out of the war zone? I mean, lying to Trump about the number of troops left in Syria. I guess it might be a broader question is, can you or can the people even have faith in the Republican side of the political elite?
No, and that's why we have to get rid of them. This next election, we have to get rid of them, and we have to put people in there that are going to be able to call these people to task. Because right now, the bureaucratic state, especially on the military, intelligence, and law enforcement side, they're running amok. They've just had no oversight. They tried to impeach President Trump and people from the deep state. The example I use all the time is during the Ukrainian gate, the first Trump impeachment. You had members of the National Security Council and members of the State Department saying with a straight face, well, the president violated the policy of the United States, and that's not how the system works. And these people literally believe that they are the ones that run the government. The same reason why you had members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or members of the State Department laughing with the media that, oh yeah, we just used to lie to the president about where his troops were in Syria. That's absolutely absurd. And to me, my question is, okay, where's Congress? Why weren't those people called to the floor of Congress, put under oath, and why weren't the oversight committees doing their job? My answer is it's a combination of cowardice and ignorance. The establishment types, they like the war, they like the bureaucratic state, they want a job in the bureaucratic state when they get out of government. And then the other guys that probably want to actually make a difference, they have no idea what that general's saying. They have no idea what that CIA guy's saying. They have no idea what the FBI guy's saying, because they speak in their double speak and they say, hey, you can't know it's classified, or they send in a really intimidating looking general. And they don't know the right questions to ask. So we need people that actually understand these systems, that have, this is the way I kind of couch it. I say you have to have people that have the utmost respect and reverence for our Constitution, but the utmost disdain for our institutions at this point to save us. And so that's where I think guys like me and guys who've fought and served in these parts of the government, this is where I think it's our time to step up and really help take our country back.
And
to what extent, just sort of a random question, what TV shows or films do you think really accurately capture, if any, the military experience?
Man, Black Hawk Down
got to be for sure.
Yeah, Black Hawk Down was really well done. The feel of American Sniper was pretty good. There's some over the top stuff there, where he's shooting guys from like 2 miles away. But they got the aesthetics and the feel, and they got the dialogue down really well. And that Zero Dark 32, I think, was really well done. The way that the intelligence guys were building that picture, there's guys out there that were, having to follow people. Some guys were working with sources. They were interrogating people. How it was like a team effort of painting a picture. I thought that was pretty well done.
What about 13 Hours?
Yeah, 13 Hours was pretty good. Yeah. I thought that was pretty well done, especially they kind of portrayed a lot of people in the State Department as a little bit bumbling, and that's been my my experience as well. And you got to see the dichotomy too, I think, in the CIA guys, the stars of 13 Hours, the GRS staff largely comes from special operations, and so there's just like a much more ground level. We want to get the job done. We're here to protect our own. We're here to do the mission type of mentality. And then same thing with the case officers that were out there trying to gather intelligence up to the last minute. They did a good job of portraying all that, which I think, people are used to seeing the CIA, like guys like John Brennan out there doing political assassinations in the States, like not literal assassinations, but weaponizing intelligence and acting very much as a political stooge. I thought 13 Hours did a good job of kind of showing what guys on the ground in the CIA are doing, getting put into these incredibly difficult positions. So yeah, 13 Hours is definitely good.
Concrete questions on policies. Someone had asked, if I'm going to pull it up, it says, regarding the Second Amendment, does Mr. Kent support repealing the NFA and turning the ATF into a convenience store rather than a government agency? Maybe that's not a substantive question, but let's get into some of the concrete stuff.
That's a good one. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I am a Second Amendment absolutist. Like, these gun laws that we have are absolute infringements on the Second Amendment. The National Firearms Act absolutely needs to be repealed. The ATF probably could be dissolved and made into like a department in the FBI. They have an absolutely abysmal track record. The gentleman, this kind of goes back to everything the Biden administration is doing, is pointing a finger in our face and telling us to quit. The guy that they just put in charge of the ATF, I mean, they could have picked any other Fed, but they picked a guy that was on the ground for the Waco massacre. If that's the type of leadership we have in these organizations, then yeah, I'd definitely be willing to go like, hey, check it out. Everybody's fired. we don't need these gun laws, and we don't need this organization of guys that are out there doing acts against their own people.
Similarly, what would your advice be to the effort of the Biden administration to politically purge the military, in the sense of trying to not only put these indoctrination provisions in, but basically kick out anybody whose politics they don't like under various guises?
Yeah, we need that. That needs to be its own hearing that Congress leads, because that's where they need to show their math and show the fact that they said that we need to have this stand down to purge our ranks of white supremacists. So that implies that the ranks are overflowing with white supremacists, and that when we bring people into the military, we don't check their criminal records, which we do. There's all kinds of checks and balances to make sure that we're not putting extremists and terrorists into the military that have existed for decades. And for General Austin, retired General Austin, now Secretary Austin, to go up there with a straight face and say that we need to have this stand down, he knows he's lying. I mean, he's an African-American man. I served under him in Iraq. He rose to be a 4-star general. I'm not saying that he never experienced any discrimination. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But for him to say that our entire institution that he came up in is systemically racist is just a lie. And then now these checks that they're putting on the security clearance process, where like they make you say, hey, do you believe in any conspiracy theories? That's just so broad that who's the guy that gets to decide what's a conspiracy theory? I mean, that's going to purge a lot of really qualified people, if they want, from the ranks. And then the way that they were going about putting the diversity officer in charge of Special Operations Command, that's another great example, because we've always had diversity officers. It's, that we have them. That's nothing new. But putting a guy in charge that has tweets saying that Trump's all Nazis, and then having him not delete the tweets sends a very clear message, and then all the trickle-down effect of all these policies that Biden's put in, all the people that are career-minded at the mid to senior levels, they want to do everything they can to get in the good graces of the current regime. So they're going to double down. It's going to have a trickle-down effect, where what you see happening now is you see all this virtue signaling about what organization can be the wokest. The Navy puts a little mask on their mascot. The Navy, or I think it was the Navy or the Army, just posted the all-gay helicopter crew. All these little things that divert from the mission, and then send a message to people there that, hey, if you supported the last administration, then you need to get the heck out of here. You're not welcome here. I think that's very bad for morale. That's going to be bad for readiness when they start going after all these people. So this is a place where, again, where Congress, the Armed Forces, the Armed Services Committee should be having open hearings and be like, okay, you can't just get away with saying it's systemically racist, but not explaining it to me. Explain it to me. I want an elected representative to get up there and say that to Secretary Austin. Like, show your math, prove it.
Well, and for people who don't know, I mean, the military is one of the main places where racism was overcome in the first place, and is
Right.
one of the most democratizing institutions in the world. So that's why it's particularly absurd and asinine, and just looks like disguised politicization of the military for a certain code of beliefs. I do wonder if somebody could answer that question about conspiracy theory by just saying, "Well, do believing weapons of mass destruction in Iraq count?"
Right. Yeah.
Because there's a lot of high-ranking generals that would be out,
Yeah.
but
Call them
who
back. Yep.
propagated that.
I would just ask if if Project Mockingbird, MK Ultra, Northwoods, if these are conspiracy theories, and if so, I mean, it's great. Then nobody believes in conspiracy theories because reality is more outrageous than conspiracy theory.
Exactly. Yeah.
I know people are asking the question that, and I know your position, but let's get it out there. Critical race theory. First of all, your position on it, and how do you act, and what would be concrete measures that you would put into place if ever elected in order to put forward what you are going to explain as your position on CRT?
Yeah. So obviously, critical race theory is horrible. It's really just being used as a tool to further divide us, creates this false narrative that America is systemically racist, and brings up a bunch of falsehoods that the police are out hunting down African American men, and the system's just stacked against people of color. Obviously, that's just not true. I think from the federal perspective, we need to cut off all federal funding for any organization that has critical race theory in it. So Congress controls the purse strings. So that's a place where Congress could really, especially in a situation where if we take back the House and Senate in 22, that we could really stymie a lot of what the executive branch is trying to do to make sure this stuff doesn't get codified into U.S. law by cutting off a lot of the funding for critical race theory in the schools. We could get rid of the entire Department of Education, because at the federal level, we don't need a Department of Education. That's a state's issue, and that would also take away one of the key vessels for critical race theory. I think attempting to push through legislation like President Trump put into place, trying to ban critical race theory from all federal organizations, would be good to do. Obviously, the president could veto it. But it would be good to do, to put up and bring forth the conversation. What I think is really important about critical race theory for us conservatives on the right to do is, when it comes up, we just have to be unapologetic and just say, hey, like, we reject this entire premises. And what the reason why the left is using it is they're using it to divide people and to make it a huge distraction. Every time Biden wants to pass through a massive spending bill that's going to put us into massive amounts of debt, all he talks about is critical race theory. You heard it just the other night. He's pretty much proposing $11 trillion more getting added on the national debt, which is pretty much going to potentially tank our economy. The Chinese could target us as the prime reserve currency holder. It puts us into a horrible position. But then all he does is he talks about critical race theory, regurgitates these talking points, and then everybody's just thinking about how systemically racist the country is, and it gets us going on all these little petty culture wars, which really is done to distract us from also the fact that, especially in 2020, the COVID lockdowns have really penalized the working class, and the working class in America is diverse. It's white, it's Hispanic, and it's Black. And the last thing the left wants us to do is to have all these different working class people wake up and realize that they have more in common with each other than they do with these massive corporations and with the government. And so Biden and the media continue to pump in all these racial tensions, all these racial narratives that are rooted in critical race theory to distract from the massive transfer of wealth that they've continued. President Trump stopped a lot of the transfer of wealth. He brought back working class jobs. Working class wages were back up. I mean, for years, how long was it where they're telling us that manufacturing is dead? It's never coming back again. Trump started bringing a lot of that back, and that was good. That's why Trump made such big gains with the Hispanic community, with the African American community. And right now, the media machine, the far left, and the corporations, they can't have that. So they have to crank up this critical race theory. And I think it's just incumbent upon us to know that they're going to call us racist, but to point that out, that, hey, all of us in the working, the middle class of every race, we have more in common with each other than we do with our corporate, technocrat, and government overlords right now.
And in that capacity, any particular economic issues that have been impacted within the district concerning the lockdowns, given Washington's had a lot of those, and reinforced by certain federal policies here and there as well. Any sense of to what degree has there been pain inflicted that is still being experienced in the local community?
So COVID's been absolutely catastrophic for this, for my district, because we fall under the leadership, our governor, Jay Inslee. He's part of the Three Stooges of the West Coast, who are constantly trying to locked out each other. So we just had a couple counties roll back and keep the small businesses closed. So all of our small business, all of our entrepreneurs, and all of our schools have been kept completely under the boot of these lockdowns. So they've been hurt very, very badly. And then obviously the workforce has been deeply affected because now people are getting the stimulus money. Between stimulus money and unemployment money, it makes sense economically for people not to go back to work. So the couple businesses that are slowly being allowed to open back up, they can't hire enough people to go back to full-time operating potential. So what I think we need to do from the federal perspective is cut off any more COVID relief bills. Just stop, because right now all these activist governors like we have out here with Jay Inslee, they're playing with federal money. If they had to pay for it themselves, they wouldn't be able to do it. So I don't think we should be giving them another dime. Like the $1.9 trillion stimulus package they just passed is absolutely ridiculous, because most of it's not stimulus. It's not actual COVID relief. It's all these side projects. So cutting that off, I think, is key. But for decades out here in the Pacific Northwest, our timber industry has been absolutely destroyed by excessive government regulation, by the federal government going and seizing federal forests and federal land and saying that we can't harvest timber there anymore. So that kills off jobs, and that also leads to bad forest management. So we've had horrible wildfires out here that become a security issue, and a safety issue every summer, and it's also killed off the economy. So for me, the America First agenda is absolutely harnessing the blessings that we have here from our land in America so that we can support our people, we can build robust and healthy economies, and so that we don't need to go and rely on other countries. That does two things. That makes us independent, that makes us secure, but it also gives us jobs here in the district. And the more agency we give to Americans, the better off they're going to be. They're going to be better stewards of the land. So out here, if we let these timber families go and continue to lead the timber community and create timber jobs and harvest the forest, we're going to build back our economy, but then we're also going to make sure the forests don't burn out every summer. We absolutely killed the economy, killed off jobs, made people move into cities, take on college debt to get these jobs that weren't there. A lot of those jobs have been replaced by the legal tech immigration that we've had, which is a whole different topic. But it's just become this economic trap that the government's just absolutely guilty of, because they've come in and they've overregulated these industries. So I think getting the deregulation policies that President Trump was starting back into our natural resources is absolutely key. That and just ending the lockdown funding.
Someone had just asked, in fact, I'll read the question, then I'll couple it with one of my questions. Chuck Lemang says, as a normal guy running for office, by Googling it, what unexpected resistance have you run into? And because everyone should learn from Trump's mistakes, what are you doing to build a team, and what is that team going to consist of in order to get to where you want to go, knowing what's ahead of you? But I guess the bigger question is, what unexpected, I think the word was friction or traction, but what unexpected hurdles have you met thus far?
Well, I'm kind of unique out here in the third district because I'm going after an incumbent. So I think normally there's a little bit more support for if you're running against someone of the opposite party, or if there's an empty seat. I think the party plays much more of a role. Right now, I'm just dealing with a lot of, I'd say, inner Republican issues, because there's some people at the local level in the local Republican Party that are like, absolutely, I want to help you. It's good that there's people that are not career politicians that are coming into this to run, but then there's also some old people that are like, hey man, we don't go after incumbents. She's been there. She votes 70% of the time in our favor. Like, what are you doing? So I don't know how much I was expecting that. I guess I just didn't think about all the inner friction. But overall, I've been relieved to see that most people do share my enthusiasm for getting rid of a bad, congresswoman. So that was probably the biggest thing, the inner Republican kind of drama. And then as far as building my own team, I've really relied on a pretty tight circle of some close friends, most of whom didn't have any political experience, so they're kind of learning with me. But then bringing in a guy like Matt Brainerd, who I didn't personally know before, but he was public enough that I got a really good feeling for the way that he looked at the political landscape, the way that he looked at the current climate, to know that our values aligned, and then going with him and putting the trust that I had to put into him. So far, it's worked out really well. So I think just always aligning with people that you share values with, I think is just really key in life, but especially in politics.
Yeah, and avoiding anybody in DC as much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the political pros are not pros. They're pros at losing. That's all they're good at. The Frank Luntzes of the world should never be hired by any competent campaign manager, any place, anywhere, or any candidate, any place, anywhere, if they want to actually win and make a positive difference. So I think your approach is the right approach. People you know, people you trust, people whose values they have publicly demonstrated they share.
And talking to people, I think, is just key. Just getting out and talking to anybody in the district, because then you just kind of get a feel. You have real world opinions and real world data from the people that you're trying to win votes from, and like that's at the end of the day, it doesn't get more honest than that. You can run all the polls you want in the world, but going out and talking to people is key.
And I know we've discussed a number of the issues, but let's say top 5. Have we not gotten to any of the major issues that you've become aware of now since having hit the streets? Like, is there anything you want to mention before we leave?
Immigration, I think, is actually key as well. I mean, the way that the illegal immigration right now is being weaponized against the working class. I think the easiest thing to talk about with immigration is the fact that the cartels control the way into America, and so there are lots of bad people that are coming into America, and there is lots of horrible things that are happening of sex trafficking and human trafficking. I think that takes up a lot of the bandwidth for good reason. But I think we also really need to point out that the most illegal immigrants are seeking a better life. They want to come to America and work. And what that's going to do is that's going to take away jobs from working class Americans. So again, this is where I think the Republican Party has the opportunity to say that, hey, we're the party of the working class. We want the lockdowns to end, and we want Americans to have working class jobs back. We want to secure our borders so that all these people aren't coming in and taking working class jobs from hardworking Americans. And then the flip side of that is legal immigration. The H-1B visa program, that has absolutely wreaked havoc on the tech sector. So we're big in tech out here. We're an offshoot essentially of Silicon Valley in Portland and Seattle. And so a lot of our tech jobs have gone away because of this legal immigration, because it's easier to bring in H-1B special skilled visas that can work, that eventually become indentured servants to the companies that bring them in. And so they work for less wages than Americans do, and then they work longer and harder hours. And so all these kids that we told, hey, you can't go get a manufacturing job, and if you're smart, you're going to go to college. They go to college, they incur a bunch of debt, and then they try and get a job in the tech sector, and their jobs have been replaced now by legal immigrants, either H-1B visa holders or the L-1 visa holders. So everything that's going on with immigration, legal and illegal, is aimed at taking jobs away from working and middle-class Americans. And we've just created this trap now where we've taken away manufacturing jobs. We've told kids they got to go out and they have to go deeply into debt for college to get a decent white-collar job, and those jobs are being taken, again, by legal immigration. So I think, again, that goes back to America first. We harness our resources as much as we possibly can here in this country to strengthen our economy, and that ultimately strengthens our nation. So the Republican Party, we're the party of the working class and the party of freedom. That's the overall message for me.
All right, excellent. Now, I said we'd keep you about an hour to an hour and a half, and we've well exceeded that. So we'll wrap it up now. Joe, I put your link in again, but let everyone know where they can find you on all social media, and then afterwards have your people send me your links, and I'll put it as the pinned comment. But go for now.
Yeah, joekentforcongress.com is the best place. All my links to the social media are on there. If they can, any donation, even just $5 really goes a long way to help me fight back against the swamp and everything that we're facing right now. So yeah, thank you very much.
All right, my pleasure. Let's stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes afterwards. Everyone in the chat, thank you very much. Share the link, share the stream, let everybody know who Joe is. And Joe, thanks again for taking me up on the offer. Everyone, have a good week. And everyone here, stay for one more second. Peace out, people.